We owe it to our neighbors to put our arms around them.
Seattle's homelessness problem is part of a growing county-wide crisis. The city has signed on to a more regional response, but with some concerns.
I still believe that there are significant flaws.
Welcome to Camp Second Chance.
And with more than 11,000 people living unhoused, the city is experimenting with creative solutions.
I went from not having anywhere to a tent to here.
Plus, Seattle's navigation team has come under fire as well.
It's not working.
Will millions in new funding and a new regional approach help solve our homelessness crisis? Our panel of journalists weighs in. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. The Seattle City Council has approved the creation of a Regional Homelessness Authority, an effort to streamline homeless services throughout King County. But that approval comes with some major concerns. As we take a closer look at this new response to homelessness with a journalist roundtable, let's start the conversation hearing from Budget Chair Sally Bagshaw on what the Council approved this week with a 5-1 vote.
This is not a perfect plan. Nobody thinks that we have gotten this 100% right, but we do have opportunities within the bylaws, within our master agreement going forward, within the good, smart people who are going to be following after us to make the necessary modifications.
Bagshaw, stepping down this year after a decade in office, admits this legislation needs work. The lone no vote, Lorena Gonzalez.
Politics have already taken a hold in this structure.
She's concerned this new authority won't be able to levy taxes for more homeless services, and says elected officials would have too much power over budget decisions and personnel issues. So let's bring in our journalist roundtable to break this down. I am joined by Sydney Brownstone, reporter for the Seattle Times, also David Kroman, a reporter for Crosscut, and finally Ashley Archibald, a reporter for Real Change. Thank you all for being here. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground today. So Sydney, let me start with you. This regional plan has changed substantially over the last couple of weeks. So let's talk about what this no vote from Lorena Gonzalez really means. She is likely the incoming council president. So how will the concerns that she's raising impact this agreement going forward?
Well, it's a little unclear. Basically, when the Seattle City Council approved the legislation for the city to enter an interlocal agreement, they also passed an ordinance authorizing the interlocal agreement that came with a list of expectations. And the threat attached to those expectations was, if you don't meet these expectations, we might not fund you.
Right.
Fund this independent agency that's the Regional Homelessness Authority.
The so-called nuclear option, yeah, right.
Right, next year. The thing is, the city always had that option because they review their budget every year and pass a budget every year. But the expectations, some have already been agreed to by King County Executive Dow Constantine and Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin. Lorena Gonzalez's concerns were that between the time that the legislation was first introduced or transmitted to the council, transmitted to lawmakers, and by the time it was passed, the share of power on the authority's governing committee, which is kind of like part of this two-tier structure that oversees something called the implementation board. That's a group of experts who kind of develop policies and budgets. The elected officials sit one level above them. Elected officials from Seattle, King County, also the Sound Cities or suburban cities, and there's a share of people with lived experience of homelessness. So what happened in the end is much more power on that committee was given to suburban cities. And Gonzalez's concern, and I think other people in the city of Seattle, is that their policy goals won't match Seattle's. You know, we've seen Seattle and the suburbs clash a number of times over policies regarding homelessness. Safe consumption sites are one of them. But in addition to that share of power being given to the suburban cities, there's also this issue of transitioning from a public development authority, which ostensibly one day possibly
could levy taxes.
Could levy taxes.
Yeah.
You can't do it under state law right now,
right.
but if state law were to change, you could.
Yeah.
To an interlocal agreement, which creates an independent agency, can't ever levy taxes.
Yeah.
So not having that revenue is something that Gonzalez and Councilmember Lisa Herbold raised in earlier meetings.
Yeah. Thanks for that breakdown. And David, I'll make this a little bit narrower with you. You made the observation recently in Crosscut that Seattle basically controls about 60% of the overall funding for this regional authority here, but would control only 25% of the vote. And this is another piece of it, these expectations. I know Seattle is pushing for no fewer than 8 votes out of 12 when it comes to amending this authority's budget or its policies. Right now, that number is 6. How do you see this political tension between the city and the other cities of the county, I guess, working out?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of idea behind it, I mean, yeah, when you do put it that way, that they contribute 60% of the budget and only control a quarter of the votes, I mean, that sounds, on its surface, to many, that sounds like a raw deal for Seattle. The sort of hope with this is that by collaborating with suburban cities, the city will kind of have more access to things like public land outside of Seattle.
Sure.
I mean, that's always been a topic of conversation around homelessness is how do we fill vacant public land with things like tiny home villages or modular housing?
Sure.
And there's just not a lot of it in Seattle. And so at least for Councilmember Bagshaw's hope is that by doing this, you kind of have a lot more access to that. And so in that sort of rosy image of how this works out, then you're getting more. They're getting more for their $73 million than just the 4 votes.
Right.
But it does sort of force the city to continue to have these conversations with the suburban cities. Including places like Enumclaw that are quite conservative in a lot of ways, are now going to have a stake in this whole process, and I think that will create some discomfort at some points.
Ashley, let me bring in here, just in terms of this idea of people having a lived experience of homelessness, they also have a quarter of the votes here, as we've been talking about, equal to what suburban cities have, what Seattle has. Is that the right kind of mix? Do people with experience of being homeless need more of a voice in this authority? What do you think?
I mean, I don't think that there is a limit to the amount of voice we can give people experiencing homelessness. That's obviously a slight exaggeration. But at the same time, they're the ones who know what they need. They're the ones who know what they want. I know a gentleman at Real Change named Canada Jones. That gentleman is almost housed. He's been outside for a very long time. All he needs is like a little bit of extra cash to get a security deposit down in his apartment. He needs someone who's going to be able to help him. So I think at the end of the day, from the folks that I talk to, what they want is someone who is going to be able to solve their problem, and having voices of people with lived experience is really going to help bring that home.
Let me try to ask a quick question. Who leads this group? This is a difficult piece. I know the nonprofit All Home King County in a bit of a leadership shakeup right now. So who is qualified to lead the Homelessness Authority? Any quick ideas on that, Sydney? What do you think?
Well, they're going to be looking for a CEO
soon,
and they're going to be hiring an executive search firm to do that. So lots of money will be spent on finding the person with the right qualifications. But I think that in general, they want people, especially on the implementation board, who come from a lot of different backgrounds: criminal justice, social services, youth and young adults. We'll see.
Yeah. Any ideas on this one? Who wants this job, I guess, David?
Right. I mean, this will be a person who will have to kind of live in between what could be some tense conversations. I think, I think, as Sydney mentioned, this person could come from any number of backgrounds, and I think maybe Seattle would want someone from more of a criminal justice reform sort of specific type of background, whereas maybe some of the suburban cities would want someone from somewhere else. So, as far as names, I have truly no idea. But,
it'll be interesting to see. Ashley, any thoughts on this? What kind of person it's going to take to lead this homelessness authority?
I think they're going to have to be exceptionally diplomatic.
Yeah, for sure, among other things. And another piece here, too, figuring out what happens to all the staff working for King County and Seattle on homelessness. When I hear new streamlined system, I think losing jobs. And I don't know your thoughts about this, Sydney, moving forward with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost certain that some jobs will be cut. However, King County and Seattle have committed to keep the people currently working within Seattle's Homeless Services Division and at the county on homeless services through the end of 2020.
Okay.
So we have yet to see those staffing plans, but that's a possibility, probability.
Yeah. Your thoughts about the job switches here, however you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, these people are represented by a union too, and so that they have certain rights under that.
True.
So it's going to be complicated. Anytime you take disparate government systems and try and consolidate them, it can be really uncomfortable. I mean, even Seattle tried to do this with its IT department, and even that was like really a big challenge to do. I mean, these things are hard. You have a lot of inertia and a lot of people and a lot of money at stake, and unions and workers' rights and things like that to consider. It'll be complicated for sure.
Actually, a delicate situation with these jobs here. Any thoughts on what happens with this?
I mean, I honestly don't know. Like Sydney said, we really haven't seen what's really going to happen. We have some, promises that they're definitely going to stay on through 2020, but I can only imagine that jobs will be lost unless they're absorbed in other places in the city. Many government agencies are good at reallocating people into other places, so we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to switch gears just a little bit here to talk about where Seattle is investing right now in the homeless response and what that could mean for our region in the future. With the recently passed city budget, Seattle homeless spending is up 8%, but the navigation team is not getting a financial boost. This is a group of police officers and outreach workers which is dealing with unsanctioned encampments in a way that has the mayor and city council in yet another political battle.
So they're going to remove this bio-waste first.
Seattle's navigation team has seen it all, cleaning up unsanctioned homeless encampments.
Because there's loose needles all over the place.
There's drug paraphernalia and human waste in an abandoned toilet among the personal belongings here, just off I-90 westbound near the Lanier Avenue exit.
This is what we consider an abandoned tent.
In this situation, multiple tents were simply left behind. After a notice was given 3 days prior, the navigation team was coming.
My heart's with the people who are living out here.
The navigation team gave 2 people at this camp referrals to shelter. And they're putting items that can be salvaged into storage.
We've got wet kitchen items here.
But with more than 11,000 homeless people in Seattle and King County, navigation team leaders say this group needs to grow to make a difference.
Any chance that we're going to get additional mental health services, additional drug rehabilitation services, any of those tools will benefit this team.
Good morning, everybody.
Providing more support for the 38-person NAV team is a priority for Mayor Jenny Durkin, too, who dropped in on a recent team meeting.
Our job is to get you more resources.
I guess I'm wondering why we need to be further expanding the navigation team.
But the city council has raised concerns about the NAV team's approach.
That doesn't work.
So, Alan, you're going to go to Zone 1.
The council's 2020 budget did not approve Shama Sawant's move to cut navigation team funding completely, but also did not approve a request from the mayor and councilmember Juarez to add team members either. The council is concerned the NAV team is now primarily focused on removing camps obstructing the public right-of-way, which does not require a 72-hour notice. Recent reports show nonprofit service providers contracting with the city are placing about 60% of the people they deal with into housing or shelter. The navigation team's number is closer to 8%.
We should not be selling this as a tool to effectively connect people with services that they so desperately need, because I'm not seeing that the statistics are supporting that narrative.
Both sides agree a lack of places to send unsheltered people is the key issue.
The biggest wish list is housing for everybody.
But does spending more on housing mean fewer dollars for the NAV team? Navigating that road is Seattle's challenge ahead.
And back to our journalist roundtable here. Ashley, let me ask you a question about this. You put together a story about REACH, the outreach group that cut ties with the navigation team a few months ago over concerns about how the NAV team might be causing trauma, not easing it for homeless people. This really speaks to the council's concerns about how the NAV team has not been successful about getting people into shelter. What do you see as the future of the navigation team?
I mean, I don't think the navigation team is going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. Yeah. There is a need to address homeless encampments in the city of Seattle. I think there's one group of people who would say that's better accomplished through through harm reduction type methods, you know, getting the trash out of there, sending in more caseworkers, that sort of thing. And that's just harder to do when there are police officers there. People feel that it disrupts their ability to forge meaningful connections, especially when they're there the day of the sweep, since that is such a traumatic experience for so many people.
Yeah, going into shelters in a police cruiser. I know that there are some people who have some issues with that. David, I'll move to you here. It's important to point out the city did not defund the navigation team. Councilmember Sawant was talking about that. That did not happen. But the team really didn't get a ringing endorsement either. And I have to point out, the navigation team is not part of this Regional Homelessness Authority. But how do you see this internal battle over the nav team working out as the regional authority is established?
I mean, yeah, I think it'll continue to be a conversation. I think Councilmember Sawant always proposes cutting the navigation team.
Yes.
That was not a new thing.
True.
And I think that was made a bigger deal than it. I mean, that was never going to happen. That was never going to pass.
Yeah.
I think it was a good political talking point going into an election.
Sure.
The reality is 8 out of 9 council members are not interested in completely defunding the navigation team. The question is sort of, I think, a larger philosophical one, which is the navigation team is objectively being used more and more as a team to just clean things up. I mean, they have rounds that they do every week. They go to the same places every day. They start downtown and they kind of move their way through. So this isn't, they're anticipating that there are going to be tents in certain places and responding to that without warning to clean them up. I mean, this is becoming more of a obstruction and accessibility team in a lot of ways. And you can debate the merits of that, but that's what the council will continue to do is if we're going to be funding this, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think, for the mayor, moving people out of rights of way is worth spending that money on. I think for some people, they'd like to see that money spent in a more concerted effort towards getting people into shelter or housing.
Thank you very much for that. Sydney, I'll go to you. In terms of where this battle about homeless sweeps is going, you did a piece recently about how the Supreme Court said it would not hear a case on whether people have a right to camp. This could have a big impact here and in other cities, too.
Well, the city of Seattle says that it won't have an impact here because basically the ruling in the Ninth Circuit said that you can't be punished for camping in a public place if there's no other reasonable place to go. And the city of Seattle's position is, well, if we don't have a blanket ban on camping, and we have certain time and place restrictions, so there are other places to go. The interesting thing to watch, however, is this ruling standing means that there may be more scrutiny about how criminalization of homelessness is working and how enforcement of certain ordinances are working. And the police have gotten increasingly involved with moving homeless folks from the rights of way. Under the community police teams and some of the bicycle officers. So that's something that the city is trying, and it's something to watch.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on and start talking a little bit about Seattle's tiny house villages, which have proven to be a very effective way to transition homeless people into housing. The City Council has put more than $2 million in the 2020 budget for more villages, but some people living in these tiny homes are raising some big concerns. Here's our story.
Walk through Camp Second Chance in West Seattle, and you'll see 50 tiny houses that represent, for residents like Stacy Lanier, a sense of security.
It's a safe spot for where you can lay your head and not have to worry. You can have your stuff. You don't have to worry about people taking it.
Local officials see these homes as secure investments, too. The Seattle City Council wants to spend more than $2 million to grow the system of 8 city-funded tiny house villages.
I mean, it's more or less a neighborhood in the community.
The Low Income Housing Institute, LIHI, says 64% of the people living in these villages in the third quarter of 2019 ended up in permanent or transitional housing.
They're in big demand. That's why we need to open more villages.
But even with that demand, there's one village that almost closed this year, Northlake, on the north side of Lake Union.
We've had a lot of trust issues with LIHI.
Alex Finch is part of the Nicholsville group that has been running this 18-home village and often clashing with LIHI, which holds the city contract to operate it.
Nicholsville was barring people, meaning asking people to leave and making them homeless again.
LIHI says Nicholsville's leaders are too punitive and have banned some residents from staying at Northlake for violating commitments like missing a security shift or a political rally.
Part of the Nicholsville story is that they would like people to be full-time activists.
Nicholsville contends it wants to work with LIHI and its case managers. And as for barring residents, Alex Finch says Northlake is simply trying to uphold the promise it made to be a good neighbor.
We have high standards.
In October, the city asked LIHI to shut down Northlake. And while that move is now on hold, at least through March, Alex Finch is still feeling stung.
That's not helpful at all. That is fear tactics, it's a dictatorship, and it's wrong.
She's living in an RV.
Pastor Jami Fecher and the Gift of Grace Lutheran Church are helping Nicholsville rent this property from Seattle City Light for $5,000 a month.
We want to have it stay.
We have a few shelter beds as well.
But this appears to be a tale of two villages. Sharon Lee speaks to the overall success of the city's tiny house program.
It's a very innovative solution.
Yet Pastor Fecher says the sometimes critical voices of homeless people themselves need to be heard by city leaders as well.
I would think that they would do a better job if they listened to those voices and took them seriously and didn't patronize them.
So coming back to our journalist roundtable here, Ashley, I want to ask you about this. This story really shows the conflict between Nicholsville, which started as a protest group, as you know, and LIHI, a nonprofit tiny house village operator which has support from the city of Seattle. Nicholsville feels like its democratic process of resident involvement is really getting stomped on. They say they do want to work with the city. The city says Nicholsville isn't getting results. What do you make of this conflict?
I think this has been a really uncomfortable relationship for quite some time now. And a lot of it is that Nicholsville is very used to its self-management model. And that means it does dictate who lives there and who doesn't. And part of that is just not going to work, I think, which is a strong statement, but honestly, having spoken to people who used to be of Nicholsville and now work in other tiny house villages like Georgetown, it just seems like the relationship may be incompatible given that there are, standards and benchmarks that the city has set, that LIHI is responsible for making sure happen. And if Nicholsville, Northlake doesn't want to work within those parameters, then it's just going to be an endless conflict.
Wow. And just to broaden this a little bit, David, I'll go to you. Another important part of this equation, even if the city is investing $2 million more into tiny houses, where would those new homes go? Siting these tiny homes can be an issue, and I'm wondering what happens next with tiny houses in Seattle.
Yeah, I think that's always hard. I mean, the city, thanks to some changes in state law recently, has more flexibility around how it can use certain public lands. It used to be that, utility land or transportation land, they would have to get market rate value for it because as a fiduciary responsibility to ratepayers. They have some more flexibility around that now, which might open up some properties. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. I mean, Councilmember Sawant wanted to open 40
of them, right?
Tiny home villages.
Yeah.
That didn't go anywhere. But I mean, that is, it's the next step to that conversation is, where do you put them? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is a challenge. And Sydney, I'm trying to broaden this even further. Could you see other cities in King County building tiny house villages? I know Tacoma has a facility now. Olympia has one too, thanks to LIHI. Do you think this model could work in the suburban cities of King County?
It depends on the political will.
Yeah.
I think that the evidence actually here in Seattle is there. I mean, tiny house villages have a pretty high rate of exit compared to other forms of shelter, like enhanced shelter.
Yeah. In terms of people getting into housing.
Yes. Sorry for the jargon.
No, you got it.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's always difficult, as David mentioned, to cite these places. There are a lot of community concerns about what happens around tiny house villages. So. Yeah, it depends on the political will.
Yeah, no, we'll see where this lands next year. We need to start wrapping up the show, and I'm trying to take an even broader view, if we can, looking at the money the city is now investing, this plan for a Regional Homelessness Authority from the county level, and now a $300 million budget item from the governor in terms of helping with the homeless. Are we on the right track to finding some solutions to our homelessness crisis? Sydney, try to help me out with this one if you can.
Yeah, I think the solutions are there, and part of the frustration that a lot of people have had with this Regional Homelessness Authority is that the idea behind it was for politicians to kind of take a step back and let the experts do their thing. Of course, that has to be balanced with accountability, right, from elected officials. So that's kind of the major tension there. How much should politics get in the way of these expert solutions? With the governor's budget, people in the advocacy community are hailing it as this is great. On the other hand, is that going to get through this very short 60-day session? It's going to be a heavy lift, so we'll see.
Okay. David, your thoughts, city, county, state plans for delivering homeless services, where we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably see a lot of action out of the mayor's office. her office has been working up to this regional homeless plan since she was elected 2 years ago.
Right.
She's now in the second half of her term. She's the next major political figure up for election, so she's going to have to make assuming that she does run for re-election, she's going to have to make a case to voters that she's made progress on this.
And is talking about $110 million for affordable housing, too. Made that announcement shortly ago. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, exactly. And, you know, the dynamics of the new council will be interesting. I think with the exception of Alex Peterson in District 4, I'd say that the rest of the council has basically concluded that they need more money to fix this problem. You know, I think when people hear that, they automatically assume the revival of the head tax. I'm not sure that that is the path that they will take, but it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a ballot measure possibly in 2020 at a year when they know that there's going to be really high turnout and left-leaning progressive turnout. They should probably, if they wanted to get more money, that would be a very good opportunity for them to do it. So. Yeah, a lot of political pieces at play.
Good observation there. Ashley, please help us wrap up here. Where we're headed, the city, county, state investments here. Let's talk about that.
I'm afraid I'm going to be really doom and gloom on this. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that a lot of homelessness advocates are very excited about the additional resources that the governor is proposing. Again, like Sydney said, it's not a sure deal. It's a proposal, and we don't know what's going to happen over the course of the 60-day session. However, $300 million once, even on top of, you know, the considerable amount of money that we are putting in locally, will never solve this problem. We are looking at the product of decades of disinvestment from the federal level, a continuously shrinking housing and urban development budget for housing since the Reagan years, where he slashed it by a huge amount. And now we have the Trump administration putting Robert Marbut Jr., in charge of the federal agency that's used to basically coordinate the homelessness response among, I think, 17 different organizations or departments. And he, as we know, has a very punitive view of what homelessness response looks like. So, and the federal government is the only government agency or the only government level that can print enough money to fix this problem.
Right.
And I just don't see it happening.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for your input here. Really appreciate that. And we will be right back.
The city's response needs to be really humane.
This should be a solvable issue, one would think.
I think that the problem is much bigger than the city.
Sucks, but I don't really care that much.
It's not going to happen overnight.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support the new Regional Homelessness Authority? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next time, a preview of the upcoming legislative session in Olympia with 4 Seattle lawmakers. What are they hoping to accomplish in 2020? That's next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.